I'm grateful you're here with me today. Before I go on, tell me in the comments where are you watching from tonight? Your city? Your state? I'd love to know. Welcome back, my friend. A quick note, this story contains fictional elements woven in for narrative and reflective purposes. The names and places are pure coincidence, but the lesson is real. The call came in at 1:52 in the morning. Not a text, not an email. A call, which meant she needed me to hear her voice when she said whatever she was about to say. I was already awake. I'm usually awake at that hour these days, old habits. Or maybe just an old heart that doesn't sleep the way it used to. My reading glasses were low on my nose, and the desk lamp threw a small, pale circle over a stack of documents I'd been marking up since dinner. My coffee had gone cold an hour before. I hadn't noticed until the phone buzzed against the wood and sent a little shiver through the papers by the window. The street outside had that particular quiet you only get after midnight in a town where people go to bed early and get up to feed animals or drive an hour to work. I answered on the third ring. Dad. Melissa's voice was clear, not sleepy at all. She hadn't been sleeping either, which told me this call had been planned. Rehearsed even. Tomorrow's the rehearsal dinner. I need to ask you something. It's almost 2, Melissa. I know what time it is. A short pause, the kind people take when they're deciding how much polish to put on something ugly. Then she stopped bothering with the polish. My guests tomorrow are important people, Dad. Business owners, investors, people David and I need to make a good impression on. So I need you to do something for me. I tightened my grip on the phone a little. Not from anger, not yet. From recognition. I'd sat through enough boardrooms, enough contract negotiations, enough hard conversations to know exactly when someone was about to say something they'd been practicing in the mirror. Keep quiet and stay in your seat, she said. Don't dress like you're going fishing, and don't start talking about that hardware store you run. You'll embarrass David and me in front of our friends. The words landed with an almost flat precision, like a rubber stamp coming down on a document. Clean, final, said not with cruelty, but with the total confidence of someone who had never once considered she might be wrong. I looked down at the papers scattered across my desk. Near the top right corner of the page in front of me, printed in a clean sans serif font, was the name of the company whose contract I'd been reviewing for the last 9 days. I'd interviewed 4 regional managers, cross-checked 14 different lease agreements, found errors buried so deep in the fine print that the company's own legal team had missed them for 2 years running. The name on that page said Whitmore Distribution Group. I didn't say it out loud. Understood, I said instead. Good. She sounded relieved, the relief of someone who'd braced for an argument and gotten compliance instead. See you tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, the Ashford Grand. Please be on time. The line went dead. I set the phone face down on the desk and sat there a moment, not moving. The house breathed around me, the low hum of the refrigerator down the hall, the occasional tick of the old radiator, the sound of nothing in particular. I picked my coffee back up, remembered it was cold, and drank it anyway. On the dresser behind my desk sat a photograph I'd kept for 28 years. David, no. My son's name was Caleb. Caleb at 7 years old, grinning and holding up a bass he'd caught at the lake 2 hours north of where we lived. Life vest, 2 sizes too big, orange, the kind that rides up around a kid's ears. He was smiling like he'd just solved something the rest of the world hadn't figured out yet. I remembered the drive home from that lake. He'd fallen asleep in the back seat with the windows down, still smelling like sunscreen and lake water, and I'd driven the whole way home in that kind of silence that doesn't feel like loneliness. It feels like something closer to peace. There was a tightness in my chest I couldn't put words to. I pulled the Whitmore file back toward me and uncapped my pen. There was still a section left to finish the risk exposure summary on the extended lease clauses, the part where I'd recommend the board not sign until 3 specific clauses were renegotiated. It was careful, exacting work, the kind that looks simple on the surface and never is. I worked another 35 minutes. When I finished, I clipped the last pages together, slid the report into the Navy folder I use for client deliverables, and set it beside my laptop. Then I sat back and let myself feel, for just a minute, exactly what my daughter had asked of me. Stay quiet. Stay in your seat. Don't embarrass us. I thought about the man on the phone with me the week before, my old business partner, Walter, who'd called just to check in after my wife's memorial service 6 months back. Don't let them make you small, Arthur, he'd told me. Promise me that. I'd promised. Sitting at that desk at 2 in the morning, I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to keep it. Miro holetan, in call, in call, in call. In call. In-call, 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 in-call. The Ashford Grand came into view as I rounded the long curve leading downtown, a 1920s building with a limestone facade and brass fixtures polished so many times they'd lost their edge. Valets in white gloves moved between gleaming cars parked out front. Through the tall second-floor windows, I could see the warm amber glow of a room set up for something important. I parked myself 2 blocks away in a self-pay lot. I never was the kind of man who hands his keys to a stranger when he can walk. On the sidewalk outside the entrance, I straightened my tie and tucked the navy folder more securely under my arm. Through the brass revolving door, the lobby opened into marble floors and the smell of fresh-cut flowers, white roses, from the look of it, arranged in tall vases flanking the front desk. A young woman in a blazer looked up as I approached. Her smile was professional and pleasant, and it flickered for just a fraction of a second with that particular uncertainty people show when they can't immediately place someone. Her eyes moved from my face to my suit, to the folder under my arm, and back. "Good evening, sir," she said. "Are you with the catering staff?" My jaw tightened, just enough to feel it. Not at her. She was doing her job, reading the room the way she'd been trained to. The question stung because it was exactly what I'd half expected. "No," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm the father of the groom." She recovered beautifully, the way people trained in hospitality always do. "Of course. The Whitmore Ferris rehearsal dinner is on the 2nd floor. Elevators are to your right." I thanked her and turned toward the elevator bank. That's when I saw Melissa. She was standing at the top of the grand staircase, the one that curved up from the lobby in a wide arc, the kind of staircase designed to make people feel like they're arriving somewhere important. She wore a deep emerald dress, hair pulled back with an almost effortless ease, and she was staring straight at me. Her expression moved fast through 3 things: surprise at seeing me there, a quick appraisal of how I looked, and then something that settled into satisfaction, the look of a woman who'd decided the situation was manageable. She came down 2 steps, just enough for her voice to carry over the lobby noise. "You're early. Invitation said 7. It's 6:50. Family was supposed to be here at 6:30. She lifted her chin slightly. "Come up. I'll walk you to your seat before the other guests arrive." She said it the way you'd say it to someone you're steering out of the way, not roughly, but with the efficiency of a woman checking an item off a list. I followed her up the stairs, folder under my arm, thinking about Walter's voice on the phone. "Don't let them make you small." I thought, "I'm working on it, Walter." The 2nd floor opened into a ballroom that smelled like fresh bread and expensive candles. Round tables draped in ivory linen, each set with crystal and low floral arrangements in dusty rose and white tasteful, clearly chosen by someone who cared deeply about being perceived as someone with taste. 76 place cards, which I'd count later. I counted them because I had nothing better to do while I waited. Melissa led me across the room at a pace that didn't invite stopping or looking around. We passed the big center tables, the ones with the best sightlines, past the small stage area already lined with place cards bearing full names and titles, and kept going toward the back wall. She stopped at a table set just beside the catering kitchen doors. Every few minutes, those doors swung open to let servers through carrying trays. The kitchen noise, clinking plates, something hissing on a stovetop, was already audible from where we stood. The place card on the table read, "Arthur, father of the groom." No last name, no title, just Arthur, like a child, or a pet, or a minor character in somebody else's story. I looked at the card for a moment, picked it up, read it again, set it back down. "David's at the head table," Melissa said, smoothing the front of her dress. "Please don't cause a distraction. Guests are going to start arriving any minute and I need everything to go smoothly." She paused, like she was deciding whether to add something, and then apparently decided to. "I know tonight might be uncomfortable for you, but this is our world, not yours. Do you understand? Her world, not mine." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a woman in her early 30s who was genuinely terrified of being seen as ordinary, who had built an entire evening around the performance of belonging somewhere above where she came from, who had called an old man at 2 in the morning because she was afraid of what he might say without being told not to. I understand more than she knows. I'll be right here, I said, and sat down at table 11. She walked back toward the entrance, heels clicking against the wood floor, and I watched her go. Behind me, the kitchen doors swung open, and a server backed through carrying a tray of bread baskets. The warm gust of air smelled like rosemary and butter. I set the navy folder on the table beside my plate, relaxed my jaw, and looked out across the room. 76 place cards, crystal catching the light. A world that had decided, without asking, that I didn't quite belong in it. Somewhere across the room, near the head table, a woman with silver hair and a navy jacket looked at me and stopped. Something shifted in her face. Not quite surprise, more like the quiet recognition of someone who's found something she wasn't looking for but is very glad to have found. I didn't know her name yet, but her eyes held mine a beat longer than a stranger's would, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up the way it always does when a room is about to get very interesting. The first guests arrived right on time, the way people usually do when they've been told punctuality signals seriousness. I watched them from table 11. The suits, the handshakes, that particular posture of people who've spent years learning how to walk into a room like they own it. David appeared near the bar, looking polished and tense, like a man who'd rehearsed this night so many times that reality felt slightly foreign to him. He moved through the arriving guests with an almost practiced ease. A handshake here, a laugh there, one hand always near Melissa's elbow, like he was holding onto something steady. He glanced toward my table once. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. Then someone called his name from across the room and he turned, and his face slid back into the expression the evening required. Confidence. A cheerful sense of belonging. That fraction of a second cost me something I couldn't name. I looked back out over the room and focused on the one thing I could still do: watch. 38 years walking into unfamiliar boardrooms had given me one particular skill: the ability to read a room the way other people read a page. Who deferred to whom? Who held their glass with both hands and who held it with one? Which conversations were real and which were performance? That way, I was never really idle in a crowd. The silver-haired woman was seated at the head table, 3 chairs from center. She had the posture of someone who'd spent decades in professional rooms and no longer needed to announce anything to anyone. Late 50s, maybe. Composed, watchful, with that quiet kind of authority that doesn't need to raise its voice. She looked at me again. Before I could do anything with that information, Melissa materialized at my table like a weather system. Pure controlled energy and careful smiles. She'd brought a couple with her, both in their 50s, both with the well-kept look of people who'd made money early enough to forget how they'd made it. And this, Melissa said, gesturing at me with the elegant vagueness of someone pointing out furniture, is Arthur, David's father. He's visiting from out of town. She smiled at the couple. Arthur, this is the Prescotts. Frank sits on the board at Kessler Financial. Frank Prescott extended a hand with the automatic warmth of a man used to networking. Arthur, good to meet you. What do you do? I opened my mouth. Melissa's hand landed on my shoulder. A pressure that was soft but firm, less affection than instruction. Her fingers dug in just enough to make the point. She let out a bright, rehearsed laugh, the kind that makes uncomfortable things sound charming. Oh, don't mind him. He's been out of the loop for years. Retired now. Keeps to himself mostly. We're so glad he could make the trip. Then, turning to Frank with a smile that closed the subject entirely, you were saying something about the Kessler portfolio? Frank Prescott's expression turned polite, adjusting to the face of a man who'd learned to move quickly past awkward moments at social events. Of course. Of course. Real glad you could be here, Arthur. His wife gave me a smile with that particular warmth people reserve for the elderly and the confused. They moved on. Melissa's hand came off my shoulder. She smoothed the front of her dress. She didn't look at me. My throat burned, but not from wanting to cry. I hadn't cried in front of anyone in a very long time. But I felt, physically, like I was swallowing something I badly wanted to let back out. My hands, flat on the table, pressed against the linen. I needed to feel something solid. Caleb had seen it. I knew because, out of pure reflex, I looked at him immediately the way you look at your child when something happens, even after he's grown, and it's too late to comfort him the way that used to work. He was about 15 feet away, talking to a man in a blue blazer. His shoulders were a little stiff. His laugh, a beat later, came a half second, too fast. He'd seen it and kept talking. I looked down at the place card in front of me. Arthur, father of the groom. The paper was expensive, the calligraphy precise. Somebody had spent real money making sure every guest felt recognized and identified. Somebody had made an exception with me. The appetizers arrived. Seared scallops on a small bed of something green, a drizzle of something gold. The server who set my plate down had a kind face and looked me in the eye the way people in service jobs do when they sense something is wrong and can't say so. I thanked him. He nodded and moved on. The Prescotts were seated 2 tables over, already absorbed in conversation. A man across the room was giving a toast, something about love being the best investment, which drew laughter and the sound of crystal touching crystal. The room was warm and bright, full of the particular energy of people radiating happiness at full volume. I thought about a kitchen table 28 years ago. Not a banquet table, a kitchen table, 3 chairs, because we'd never needed 4. Caleb was 7 or 8. He'd spent 20 minutes explaining with great seriousness why dinosaurs were better than sports cars. I'd argued the opposite, with equal seriousness, and by the end of dinner we were both laughing so hard he knocked his milk over. My wife had stood in the kitchen doorway, watching us with her arms crossed and a smile she pretended not to have. That table was the real one. Everything else was decoration. The silver-haired woman rose from the head table. She crossed the room with deliberate calm, not greeting anyone, weaving around clusters of conversation, until she reached table 11 and sat down in the empty chair across from me with the ease of someone who'd claimed it in advance. She set her hands flat on the table and looked straight at me. No preamble, no small talk. "I thought that was you," she said. "Wasn't sure at first. It's been a few years." Her voice landed in my chest like a key turning in a lock. I recognized it. I hadn't heard it in a long time, but I recognized it the way you recognize the sound of a door in the house you grew up in. "Diane," I said. "Diane Kessler. My old business partner. 9 years together, one of the sharpest analytical minds I'd ever worked with. A woman who could take apart a fraudulent contract structure with the same calm pleasure other people bring to a crossword. She'd left our firm in 2009 to go independent. We'd kept loose touch for a few years, then lost track of each other, the way people do. "You look exactly the same," she said. And she didn't say it as a compliment. She said it like an observation she found more valuable than flattery. "You won't," I said. "You look better." The corner of her mouth moved. I stopped working for demanding people. Then, quieter. "What are you doing at table 11, Arthur?" Apparently I'm retired and my mind's slipping. Her eyes sharpened. "She said that? In front of a Kessler board member and his wife?" "She did." Diane's jaw tightened. A muscle moved in her cheek. She set her wineglass down with more precision than the gesture required. "Does she know who you are?" "She knows I run a hardware store." "And the report? The Whitmore risk assessment. Was that yours?" My eyes went to the Navy folder sitting right beside my plate. "I sent it Monday morning." Diane straightened. Her expression carried something complicated: recognition, calculation, and something that might have been the start of anger, though not entirely on her own behalf. "Arthur," she said carefully, "I've been consulting with Gerald Whitmore's team for the last year and a half. I was in the room when that report circulated internally." She paused. "It didn't go out under your name." The words sat between us. "I know," I said. "How long have you known?" "Since the appetizers came out." She turned her wineglass without drinking from it, just needing something to do with her hands. Her eyes drifted toward the small stage area near the head table, where a microphone stand had been set up. "Program says there's an opening speech from Melissa Whitmore," she said. "I've seen it." Diane looked at me. "What are you going to do?" I picked up my fork and studied the scallops. Had to admit, they were very good, the kind of thing you only find at places that charge enough to make sure it is. "Nothing," I said. "Not yet." Her eyes stayed on me a long moment, reading me the way she always had, the way good analysts read everything, looking for what's hidden underneath. Then she nodded slightly, like confirming a hypothesis. Across the room, a microphone clicked on. A voice asked for everyone's attention. Melissa was making her way toward the small stage. Before I tell you what Melissa said when she took that microphone, and what I heard that made my hand go completely still on the table, drop a number in the comments right now, however old you are. just so I know you're still with me, because what comes next is the part that changes everything. One more thing before we go on. Some parts of this story have been adjusted for narrative purposes. If this isn't the kind of story you're looking for, now's a fine time to step away. But if you're staying, hold on tight. The appetizers came and went. Somewhere between the scallops and the first round of champagne toasts, Melissa took the microphone, and the room gave her exactly the full attention she'd been anticipating all evening. She stood on the small stage with the ease of someone who'd rehearsed this moment so many times it no longer felt like a rehearsal. The emerald dress caught the light, her posture was perfect, and when she smiled out at the room, it was the smile of a woman who believed, completely and without doubt, that she was exactly where she deserved to be. David and I are so grateful to be surrounded by the people who matter most to us tonight, she began, her voice warm and affectionate. Applause. A generous, sincere round from 76 people who'd eaten good food and drunk good wine and were feeling very well disposed toward the world in that moment. I want to take a minute, Melissa went on, her tone shifting slightly, enough to sound more serious, more determined to talk about something beyond the wedding. Because even with everything going on these last few weeks, I never stopped doing what I do best. I set my water glass down slowly, the way you set something down when you need your hands to be still. As many of you know, I oversee strategic operations at Whitmore Distribution, and last week, I identified something our internal teams had missed. She paused, the way a performer pauses, timed for maximum effect. Critical errors in our warehouse lease agreements, buried so deep in the fine print they'd gone unnoticed for 2 years. My jaw tightened. The feeling started there and spread down into my chest, settling somewhere between my sternum and my stomach, like a stone dropping into still water. I reviewed 14 different lease agreements, she said, compared penalty clauses across 9 locations, and what I personally identified was a liability exposure that, left uncorrected, would have cost Whitmore Distribution somewhere between $2 and $3 million in hidden penalties over the next 5 years. The room responded with the sound of people just newly impressed, a collective intake of breath, a steady murmur, and finally applause that grew steadily, coming from people who were genuinely moved. Across the room, at the head table, a man I hadn't been introduced to yet but recognized immediately, sat with his hands flat on the tablecloth in front of him. Gerald Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Distribution, Melissa's father, somewhere in his 60s, silver-haired, a face that had probably been handsome in his younger years, and had grown more useful with age, authoritative, precise, hard to read. He wasn't clapping. He was writing something in a small notebook. Melissa's voice rose. I'm proud to say my work alone this week may have saved this company upwards of $3 million. The applause grew louder. 2 people at the center table stood up. I didn't stand. I looked down at my hands. I want to tell you exactly what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters. It wasn't rage. The word rage is too clean, too simple for what moved through me sitting at table 11, watching my daughter get a standing ovation for 9 days of my work. It was something more complicated. It was the particular ache of a man who spent his whole life building things quietly, only to watch someone else pick up the finished product and take a bow. Underneath that ache was something colder, too, something to do with the fact that my son was sitting at the head table listening to his future wife describe my research in her own words, and not once did he look toward the corner of the room where his father was sitting. Diane leaned toward me across the table. Her voice was barely a murmur. She used your framework, the risk matrix, the layered penalty analysis. That's your structure, Arthur. I'd recognize it anywhere. I know, I said. My voice came out flat and even. I'd learned that trick a long time ago. Keep the surface calm. When the current underneath is pulling hard. She even used your language, Diane said. And now there was an edge in her voice, something sharp and held back. The phrase she used about liability exposure compounding across locations. That's straight out of your executive summary. I know that too, Arthur. Diane's hand moved across the table, then stopped just short of touching mine. Her gaze was fierce and direct. What are you going to do? I looked at Melissa, still standing at the microphone, savoring the moment, completely convinced the room belonged to her. Then I looked at Gerald Whitmore, who'd stopped writing and was rereading whatever he'd just jotted in that notebook with the concentration of a man double-checking arithmetic. Nothing, I said. Not yet. People reveal more when they think the truth has agreed to stay quiet. Diane breathed out through her nose, lips pressed together. She picked up her wine glass and set it back down without drinking. She's going to finish that speech and go sit back down, convinced she's gotten away with it. Yes, and you're going to sit here for now. Melissa was wrapping up, thanking the guests again, thanking her father, and then turning to smile at him with the particular warmth of a daughter who knows she's just made him proud. Gerald Whitmore's expression didn't change much, but he set his pen down and folded his hands. The applause faded into the low hum of dinner conversation resuming. Melissa stepped down from the stage, and I watched Gerald Whitmore's eyes track her the whole way back to her seat. He didn't say anything to her. He picked up his own copy of the evening's program and looked at it, and then his eyes moved slowly across the room, the way a man scans a room when he's trying to place something. They landed on me. Just for a second. I don't think he knew why he looked. I don't think he knew, yet, that he was looking at the man whose 9 days of work his daughter had just claimed in front of 76 people. I picked my fork back up. The scallops had gone slightly cold, but I ate them anyway. Diane watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between admiration and disbelief that I could sit there and eat. "You're not going to say anything," she said. It wasn't a question anymore. "Not tonight. Not in front of everyone. That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" I thought about that for a moment. About Walter's voice on the phone. About the photograph on my dresser of a 7-year-old holding up a fish like he'd conquered something. About 28 years of staying quiet at kitchen tables and boardroom tables alike, because staying quiet had always felt safer than taking up space. "It's about not needing the room to see it tonight," I said. "The truth doesn't need an audience to be true. It just needs time." Diane studied me a long moment, then sat back in her chair. "You've gotten more patient in your old age, Arthur. I've gotten tired of the other way." Dessert came and went. Toasts continued, each one warmer and more sentimental than the last as the wine did its work. I stayed at table 11 through most of it, occasionally catching Caleb's eye across the room. Each time, he looked away a half-second faster than felt natural. Near the end of the evening, as guests began drifting toward the doors in 2s and 3s, saying their goodnights, I stood up, folded the navy folder under my arm, and made my way toward the head table. Gerald Whitmore was still seated, notebook closed now, watching the room empty out with the patient attention of a man who notices everything and reveals very little. I stopped in front of him. "Mr. Whitmore, I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Arthur Kessler, father of the groom." He looked up at me, and something in his face shifted, not recognition exactly, but the beginning of a question forming behind his eyes. "Arthur Kessler," he repeated slowly, like he was turning the name over, checking it against something. "Kessler Risk Advisory?" "That's right. That's right." His eyes moved to the folder under my arm, then back to my face. "You sent us the lease liability assessment." "Monday morning." I did. The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt longer. I watched him do the math, the report, the name, the daughter at the microphone, the 9 days of specific. The report, exacting language that had come out of her mouth an hour earlier, as though she'd written it herself. "That was your work," he said. "Not a question. Every page." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call Melissa over. He simply nodded once, slowly, the way a man nods when a puzzle he'd been turning over finally clicks into place. "I owe you an apology I didn't know I needed to give an hour ago, Mr. Kessler. You don't owe me anything tonight, Mr. Whitmore. I only came to walk my son down the aisle tomorrow. Everything else can wait." I meant it. I still mean it. I hadn't come to that ballroom to burn anything down. I'd only brought a folder full of documents and shown up on time. The rest, as it turned out, took care of itself. Gerald Whitmore studied me a moment longer, and something in his face that hard to read, authoritative something, softened just slightly. "Get home safe, Mr. Kessler." I nodded and turned toward the exit. Diane caught up with me near the elevators. "That was almost anticlimactic," she said, half smiling. "Good," I said. "Some things don't need fireworks. They just need to be true." The wedding happened the next afternoon, under a white tent in the Whitmore family's backyard, with string lights and a string quartet, and Caleb standing at the altar looking more nervous and more happy than I'd ever seen him look. I sat in the second row. Melissa didn't speak to me before the ceremony, and I didn't go looking for her. But 3 weeks later, my phone rang at a reasonable hour for once. "Dad," Caleb's voice, quieter than I was used to hearing it. "That report you were working on, The night she called you. Did you ever finish it? I smiled, really smiled, for the first time in what felt like days, without meaning to. Sent it in Monday morning, I said. Caleb went quiet on the other end. Then, for the first time in a long while, he laughed. A year later, I found myself back in a hotel ballroom. Denver this time, a different city, with that kind of October cold that means business. A different room, bigger and brighter, with a stage built for 400 people instead of 76. The National Supply Chain Integrity Summit, the kind of event where business cards actually matter. Mine read Arthur Kessler, independent risk advisory consultant. I stood backstage and watched for a moment. Then the announcer's voice came through the speakers. Our keynote speaker brings 32 years of independent supply chain risk evaluation. His work has protected hundreds of millions of dollars in assets across a dozen industries. He's turned down multiple executive positions to maintain his independence, because, in his own words, the most valuable person in any transaction is the one who has nothing to lose by telling the truth. Please welcome Arthur Kessler. I walked out. The lights were warm. The applause was generous. I found the fourth row without meaning to, and there was Caleb, standing before nearly the whole room, clapping with the particular intensity of a man trying to make up for lost time. His face was open and unguarded, and his pride was so plain that I felt a lump rise in my throat and had to glance briefly at the podium to collect myself. I gave my remarks. I didn't mention the rehearsal dinner, didn't mention lease clause 14 or table 11 or a phone call at 2 in the morning. Those things belonged to another room. This room was for the work. Afterward, in the hallway leading to the main lobby, Caleb was the first to find me. You were good up there, he said. You've never heard me speak before, I said. I know. His voice was soft. I should have. Diane appeared, then Frank Prescott, who, it turned out, had brought Kessler Risk Advisory onto the Summit program as part of a broader industry integrity initiative his firm was co-sponsoring, and then Gerald Whitmore, who shook my hand with the firmness of a man who remembered exactly what had happened 12 months earlier and had chosen to build something from it instead of walking away. Then Melissa appeared beside Caleb. She looked more settled than she had a year ago, less performed, more present, with that particular quality of someone who'd spent 12 months learning the difference between belonging and appearing to belong. I'm working with an outside consultant now, she told me. Learning the real methodology is harder than it looks. Do. Most things worth knowing are, I said. She nodded. That was enough. There was no big reconciliation, no ceremony. Just two people who'd been on opposite sides of a hard night and had each, in their own way, come out the better for it. Caleb walked me to the elevator. He stopped at the doors. He looked at me the same way he had from the fourth row, steady, and with no trace of the old shame. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Neither did I. Looking back on that October night, I think about what it cost everyone in that room and what it gave us in return. I'm not a man who talks easily about faith, but I believe there's a way things arrange themselves so the truth finds its footing eventually, whether we help it along or not. That night, I had no intention of exposing anyone. I only carried a folder and showed up on time. Everything else worked itself out. Here's what I'd say to any parent, to anyone who's spent years making themselves smaller to keep the peace. Don't do what I did. Don't wait 30 years for the people you love to see you clearly. The silence I kept wasn't humility. It was fear wearing patience like a disguise. And fear, held long enough, becomes a wall between you and the people who would have loved you fully, if only you'd let them. I believed hiding my work protected my relationship with my son. What it actually did was leave a space where a lesser version of me could take root. Caleb didn't learn to be ashamed of me. He learned to be ashamed of a man I'd invented through my own silence. That was my failure as much as anyone's. If your family has ever asked you to make yourself invisible for their comfort, know that dignity doesn't come from silence. It starts the moment you decide your truth deserves the space it takes up. What the world might call a father's story of quiet revenge, I'd call something simpler. A man who finally stopped apologizing for being himself. And sometimes, that quiet refusal to disappear is the most powerful act of justice a family will ever witness. If this story moved you, drop a comment below and tell me what it stirred in you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you believe the truth, spoken calmly and at the right moment, still has the power to change a room, subscribe to this channel, because that's exactly the kind of story we tell here. Thank you for staying until the last word. It means more than you know. And before you go, one last note. The stories on this channel contain fictional elements, created purely for reflection and storytelling. If that's not the kind of content you're looking for, that's all right. Take care, and I hope you find what works best for you.